In this section, we are taking a look at the concept of inflation. So, we will have some interesting questions. What is the overall price level, and what do we even mean by overall price level? How is inflation measured using consumer price index, and what is even the consumer price index? Is it accurate? Who are the winners and losers during inflation? What are the costs of inflation? What is the relationship between inflation and interest rate? So, first of all, we want to talk of what we mean by price level. So, when we talk of price level, we are looking at the average level of prices in the economy. So, we are not looking at the price of one good or service, but we are taking all the goods and services and then taking the average price. So when we talk of the price level, we are looking at the average price, the average level of prices in an economy. So when we talk of inflation, we are looking at the continuous rise in the overall price level. In other words, we are looking at the rise in the average level of prices in an economy. So it's not just a rise in the price of one good or a few goods and services, it's actually the average. So generally, when we are looking at consumer price index, when we are taking a look at the consumer price index, the consumer price index is looking at the average level of prices from the perspective of a consumer. If we decide to use the producer price index, it's doing that from the perspective of the producer. Okay, deflation is, I would say, the opposite of inflation. It is a decrease in the overall price level in an economy. So how is inflation measured using CPI or consumer price index? So the higher the inflation rate, the greater the rate of decline in purchasing power. What do we mean by purchasing power? You are simply looking at how much a dollar can buy at a given period of time. So let's say 10 years ago, with $1, you could buy one sushi. It simply means 1 year, 10 years later, $1 can no more buy that sushi because the purchasing power has fallen. In other words, when inflation occurs or when the average level of prices goes up, $1 can no more buy as many or as much goods and services as it could before. So the consumer price index is a measure of the prices of a basket of consumable goods and services that serves to gauge inflation. So you are looking at a basket of goods and services that a typical consumer or a typical household generally buys. And if the average price changes over time, then you know the CPI is going up or inflation is increasing. So Statistics Canada bases the CPI on a basket of over 600 consumer goods and services. Of course, they have different weights. So here you just have some of them. Okay. For example, food item, the weight is 16%, shelter is 30%, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now let's take a look at some computations. So when you want to compute the CPI, you generally have what is referred to as the base year. The base year is the year that is like your starting point. Then you want to see if the price has changed from one year to another compared to your base year. So here, for example, this example is taking 2020 as your base year. Now, here we are assuming that this country produces two goods and services, bread and oranges. And here you have the prices. Bread costs $1 in this year, oranges cost that. And these are the quantities produced. Now, generally, when you want to measure inflation, you hold quantities constant. You can see from one year to another, the quantity is constant. So every year you only produce 24 loaves of bread and oranges, you produce 12 oranges. However, you can see the effect of prices. So if you look at the total price or the cost of bread and oranges in 2020, it's $48. And if you want to take a look at the CPI, you simply take the cost of market basket in the current year divided by the base year times 100. Given that this is a base year, we are going to have 48 divided by 48 times 100. We have 100. So generally 100 means it's the base year, or it means the current year is not different from the base year. Now here you can see that the prices have changed. So when you do the math, we've said we always hold quantity constant, you have 52. So the CPI is simply the cost for the current year divided by the base year. The current year is 52.8, the base year is 48. When you do the math, you have 110. It means it has gone up by 10. Same thing for 2022, that's what you have. So CPI is there to tell you, relative to the base year, this is how it has gone up. Now, is CPI accurate? Given that we are taking a basket and it's just a hypothetical basket, at times it overstates the true inflation levels because some people do not even consume some of the things in that basket. Now we have what is known as substitution bias. So CPI suffers from substitution bias in the sense that some people have some bias because the price of a particular good goes up. It's very likely they will substitute that good for something else. You'll just say, you know what, I'll stop buying this thing and I'll buy something else. Quality bias, it doesn't take into account that it's possible that the price of a good goes up because the quality of that good has also gone up. It will simply say, oh, this good costs more now, but it hasn't taken into account the fact that that good may technically no more be exactly the same good because of quality, because of improvement. Now you have new outlets. So generally, it's looking at the price of those goods from traditional outlets, but you have different outlets today. People no more only buy from brick and mortar, some call it. People buy online, people buy everywhere. Then you have new products. Given that it has a basket of goods and it holds that constant, it doesn't take into account the fact that people have moved from certain products and are now buying new products. It doesn't take that into account. Now, there is a very important concept when it comes to inflation. Unanticipated changes, no one wants that. So when you don't see inflation coming, if you know that inflation is coming or price or the cost of living will go up, then it's very likely you will do the right thing so that it doesn't crush you. For example, if you know that the price of houses will go up and you want to buy a house, then you'll make sure you buy it before it goes up. So anticipated inflation is the inflation rate that people expect. It causes few problems since people see it coming and prepare for it. But unanticipated changes in the price level are almost universally considered to be bad and to require policy remedy. In other words, the government has to do something about that. So unanticipated inflation is the inflation that people do not see coming and do not prepare for it. And it leads to some people gaining and some losing, and what we call wealth or income redistribution from one group to another. So here you have diagrams of how inflation has changed from time to time. Now, inflation lowers income in real terms. What do we mean? You may still be making, let's say, 100,000. However, in real terms means 100,000 today can no more buy as many goods as 100,000 5 years ago could buy. That's just what it means. It erodes real wealth of the creditor. So if you give a loan to someone, let's say you give them 100,000 and they bring it back, they repay you 100,000 5 years from today, the value of 100,000 5 years from now is not the same as today. Why? Because in real terms, 100,000 can no more buy as many goods and services 5 years from today as it can buy now. So it simply hurts people whose income are tied to long-term contracts. Why? Because when you are negotiating your contract, you are looking at the present. If you don't take into account the rate of inflation when it occurs, the amount of goods and services you are able to buy is no more the same. So debtors pay back dollars worth less. So if you took a loan from someone 100,000, it can buy a certain amount of goods and services today. When you pay back that money 5 years from today, if we have unanticipated inflation, then the money is no more worth what you took from them. You are still paying back 100, but it's not worth the same. However, if it is anticipated, then they will include that in the negotiation. So firms, of course, at times can raise prices and benefit from it. Why? Because it costs them less and now they are selling at a higher price. So coming around the end of this section, what are the costs of inflation? We are looking at uncertainty when it is unanticipated. No one wants that. It discourages investment and economic growth. And of course, if you have inflation in one country relative to another country, it may just make your goods too expensive relative to other competing countries. And it can lead to what we call hyperinflation, which just destroy the value of your currency. So let's rapidly talk about the impact of inflation on interest rate. Now, interest rate is the cost of money. When you go to the bank to get a loan for mortgage or something like that, you generally have what is known as nominal interest rate. Or if you go and put your money in the bank in a savings account, you receive interest for that money. However, that amount, let's say they decide to give you 5%, that is a nominal interest rate. Real interest rate is the 5% minus inflation rate. In other words, you've gained 5%, but inflation makes you lose a certain amount. So if you gain 5% and inflation is 6%, actually your money has lost 1%. But if you gain 5% and inflation is 4%, then you've gained 1%. So it's important to always look at real interest rate, which is the difference between nominal interest rate and the rate of inflation. So if inflation is anticipated accurately, then creditors can focus on the real interest rate based on what they anticipate. That's why some groups will always negotiate and try to protect themselves by including inflation in their contracts so that they will automatically get an adjustment. Now, in the last video, we'll take a look at economic fluctuations.